Most men think attraction is something you do in the moment, a line you say, a move you make, a spark you either have or you don't. But what if that's the surface illusion? And the real game is happening quietly, beneath awareness, long before anything physical even begins. Because for many women, attraction doesn't start with what you do, it starts with how safe your presence feels. Not safe in the obvious sense, but in a deeper psychological way. The mind is constantly scanning. Is this person grounded? Are they reactive or in control of themselves? A man who is composed, who doesn't rush to impress or chase approval, sends a signal that bypasses logic and lands directly in the subconscious. It says without words, I am stable. And stability, when felt emotionally, becomes a foundation for desire. Not excitement first, safety first. And from that, everything else grows. This is where most misunderstand mystery. They think it's about distance, silence, or playing games. But real mystery is internal. It's the quiet confidence of someone who doesn't feel the need to constantly explain themselves. A man who is psychologically anchored, who knows who he is without seeking validation, naturally becomes harder to predict, not because he's hiding something, but because he isn't performing. And that unpredictability, when paired with emotional steadiness, creates a tension the brain can't easily resolve. It leans in, trying to understand, trying to feel more. That's where intrigue is born, not in what you withhold, but in what you no longer need to prove. And then there's something even more subtle, something rarely talked about. It's not dominance that creates attraction. It's attunement. The ability to read what isn't being said, a shift in tone, a pause in energy, a fleeting expression. Women are often highly responsive to emotional awareness because it signals something deeper than confidence. It signals intelligence of the social and emotional world. When a man responds not just to words, but to undercurrents, it creates a feeling of being understood without explanation. And that feeling is powerful. It lowers defenses, opens space, and builds a connection that feels almost unspoken, yet undeniable. But attraction doesn't always appear instantly. In fact, for many women, it builds over time, quietly, almost invisibly. It's reactive. It grows in response to how a man makes her feel about herself, not through compliments, but through presence. Does she feel seen in a way that feels rare? Does she feel distinct, not interchangeable? When someone feels uniquely recognized, their mind begins to associate that person with a heightened sense of identity. And that's when attraction deepens, not because of what's being offered externally, but because of how it reshapes something internal. This is also why constant validation often backfires. It feels good in the moment, but it removes the space needed for curiosity to grow. The human mind is wired to engage more deeply with what it doesn't fully understand or consistently receive. When attention is intentional, given with awareness rather than freely and constantly, it creates patterns the brain tries to interpret. Why now? Why this moment? That subtle questioning increases emotional investment. It's not about playing games. It's about allowing space for the other person to think, to feel, to lean in. And then there's restraint. Something that seems counterintuitive in a world that encourages expression at all times. But there's a quiet power in holding back, just slightly. Not suppressing who you are, but choosing not to reveal everything all at once. When access feels measured, it signals value. The subconscious begins to assign weight to what is not immediately available. And that sense of earned closeness, of gradually discovering someone rather than instantly knowing them, creates a tension that intensifies connection. In the end, attraction isn't about performance. It's about presence. It's about what is felt, not what is shown. And the deeper truth is this: what people are drawn to isn't just who you are, but how your presence shapes their internal world. And once you understand that, everything changes. You've probably been told that attraction is about confidence, charm, or saying the right thing at the right time. But if you look closely at real human behavior, not surface-level advice, but what actually happens beneath awareness, you start to notice something different. Attraction isn't sparked by performance. It's triggered by perception. And perception is shaped in ways most people never consciously see. Because before anything else, the mind is asking a quiet question. How do I feel in this person's presence? Not just emotionally, but psychologically. For many women, attraction begins with a subtle sense of emotional safety, not comfort in the obvious sense, but the feeling that a man is grounded within himself. A man who doesn't rush, who doesn't overreact, who isn't trying to win approval every second. That kind of restraint signals control. And control signals stability. It's not loud, but it's powerful, because the subconscious associates it with something rare, someone who isn't easily shaken. And that's where intrigue starts to form. Not from distance or silence, but from a kind of internal certainty. When a man is anchored in who he is, he naturally becomes less predictable, not in behavior, but in energy. He's not reacting to impress, not adjusting himself to fit expectations. And that creates a subtle tension. The mind leans in, trying to understand him, trying to decode what feels different. It's not confusion, it's curiosity. And curiosity is one of the most underestimated drivers of attraction. But here's where things get even more nuanced. Attraction isn't built on dominance the way many assume. It's built on awareness, specifically emotional attunement, the ability to notice what isn't being said. A slight shift in mood, a hesitation in tone, a moment of silence that carries meaning. When a man can pick up on those signals and respond in a way that feels natural, it creates something deeper than attraction. It creates resonance. It makes a woman feel understood without having to explain herself. And that kind of connection bypasses logic. It feels instinctive, almost automatic. What most people don't realize is that attraction, especially for women, is often not immediate. It develops, it evolves, it responds to experience. It's less about what you present and more about what someone feels over time. And one of the most powerful feelings is this, being seen in a way that feels unique. Not just noticed, but recognized. When someone feels like they are perceived as distinct, not just another person, but someone specific, it strengthens their sense of identity. And the mind begins to associate that feeling with the person who created it. That's when attraction deepens, quietly but strongly. This is also why constant validation can weaken connection. It seems counterintuitive, but when attention is always available, it loses its psychological weight. The brain stops engaging with it deeply because there's nothing to figure out, nothing to anticipate. But when attention is intentional, given with presence, not just frequency, it creates contrast. And contrast makes moments stand out. It invites the mind to think, to reflect, to wonder. And that mental engagement builds emotional investment over time. Then there's the role of restraint. Not withholding in a manipulative way, but allowing space. Not revealing everything at once. Not expressing every thought the moment it appears. There's a quiet intensity in that. Because when access to someone feels gradual, it naturally increases perceived value. The subconscious begins to assign importance to what unfolds slowly. It feels earned, not given. And that process of discovery, layer by layer, creates a kind of tension that keeps attraction alive. What all of this points to is a deeper truth. Attraction isn't about doing more. It's about understanding more. Understanding how presence, perception, and subtle emotional signals shape the way people feel, often without them even realizing why. And when you begin to see that, you stop chasing reactions and start creating experiences. Most people approach attraction like it's something visible, something you can control through words, gestures, or confidence alone. But the truth is, what really drives connection is almost invisible. It lives in the space between actions, in the pauses, in the subtle emotional signals that most people overlook. And once you start to see it, you realize attraction isn't created outwardly. It's triggered internally. Because before anything is said or done, the mind is already forming a quiet judgment. How does this person make me feel? Without trying. That's where everything begins. For many women, attraction doesn't ignite from boldness or intensity. It starts with emotional stability. A man who is centered, who doesn't rush to impress or fill silence, creates a kind of psychological calm. And that calm does something powerful. It lowers resistance. It tells the subconscious, there's no pressure here. And in that absence of pressure, curiosity has space to grow. That's why the men who try the hardest often feel the least compelling. Effort, when it's driven by the need to be liked, carries a certain weight. It feels like something is being pushed. But when someone is simply present, fully there, but not seeking validation, it creates a different kind of energy. One that feels effortless, even if it isn't. And the mind is naturally drawn to what feels effortless because it signals confidence without needing to announce it. This is where mystery begins to take shape, but not in the way it's usually described. Mystery isn't about being distant or unavailable. It's about being self-contained. When a man doesn't feel the need to constantly explain himself, justify his actions, or reveal everything at once, it creates depth. Not artificial depth, but real psychological space. And the human mind is wired to explore what it doesn't fully understand. It starts asking questions, filling in gaps, imagining possibilities. That process alone builds intrigue, but attraction doesn't deepen through mystery alone. It deepens through connection, and not surface-level connection, but emotional precision. The ability to notice the small things, a shift in energy, a moment where someone becomes slightly more guarded or slightly more open. These are signals most people miss, but they matter. Because when someone feels like they are being understood at that level without needing to spell it out, it creates a sense of alignment. And alignment feels rare. It feels like, this person gets me. And that feeling can be more powerful than any compliment. At the same time, attraction often builds in a way that isn't immediate or obvious. It's not always a spark. Sometimes it's a slow shift, a growing awareness that being around someone feels different. And a big part of that comes from how a man makes a woman feel about herself. Not through flattery, but through subtle reinforcement. Does she feel more like herself around him or less? Does she feel seen in a way that feels specific, not generic? When someone feels uniquely recognized, it strengthens their internal sense of identity. And the mind starts to associate that feeling with the person who created it. That's where emotional investment begins, not from intensity, but from consistency paired with variation. Because here's something most people overlook. Predictability can weaken attraction, but randomness alone doesn't build it either. It's the balance between the two. When attention is given with intention, not constantly but not absent either, it creates a rhythm. And the brain starts to engage with that rhythm, trying to understand it, anticipate it. That engagement pulls someone in, often without them realizing why. And then there's restraint, the quiet factor that changes everything. In a world where people are encouraged to express everything instantly, holding back just enough becomes powerful. Not hiding, not pretending, but choosing not to reveal every thought, every feeling, every layer all at once. That restraint creates tension, and tension, when it's not forced, becomes magnetic. It makes each interaction feel like part of something unfolding, rather than something already defined. When you step back and look at all of this, a pattern starts to emerge. Attraction isn't about doing more, saying more, or proving more. It's about understanding how subtle psychological cues shape perception. It's about realizing that what people feel in your presence matters more than what you show on the surface. And once you understand that, you stop trying to impress and start becoming someone people feel. Most men are taught to focus on what's visible, what to say, how to act, how to appear confident. But attraction doesn't operate on the surface. It moves quietly, beneath logic, shaped by subtle emotional signals that are felt long before they're understood. And the moment you realize that, everything shifts. Because attraction isn't about what you show. It's about what someone experiences internally when they're around you. It begins with something most people overlook, emotional safety. Not the obvious kind, but the psychological sense that you are steady, not reactive. A man who doesn't rush to fill silence, who doesn't overextend himself to gain approval, creates a space that feels calm without trying. And that calm does something powerful. It lowers defenses. It tells the subconscious, there's nothing to prove here. And when there's nothing to prove, the mind becomes more open, more curious, more willing to engage. From there, something more subtle starts to develop, intrigue. But not the kind built on distance or games. Real intrigue comes from self-containment. When a man is internally anchored, when he isn't constantly adjusting himself to be liked, he becomes harder to predict. Not because he's inconsistent, but because he's not performing. And that unpredictability, when it's grounded in stability, creates a kind of tension the mind can't easily resolve. It leans in, trying to understand what feels different. That quiet curiosity is where attraction begins to deepen. But intrigue alone isn't enough. What strengthens connection is emotional precision, the ability to notice what most people miss. A slight shift in tone, a pause that lingers longer than usual, a moment where someone becomes just a little more guarded. These are signals, and when a man responds to them naturally, without forcing it, it creates a sense of being understood. Not in a surface-level way, but in a way that feels almost unspoken. And that feeling is rare. It makes someone feel seen without having to explain themselves. And that kind of recognition builds trust faster than words ever could. At the same time, attraction doesn't always arrive as a spark. Often, it builds quietly over time. It's reactive. It grows based on how someone feels in your presence again and again. And one of the most powerful drivers of that growth is identity reinforcement. When a woman feels more like herself around you, more understood, more distinct, more real, her mind begins to associate that version of herself with you. It's not about compliments or validation. It's about creating an environment where she feels uniquely recognized. And once that association forms, attraction deepens in a way that feels natural, almost inevitable. This is why constant attention can actually weaken connection. When something is always available, the mind stops engaging with it deeply. It becomes predictable, expected. But when attention is intentional, when it's given with presence rather than frequency, it creates contrast. And contrast makes moments stand out. It invites the mind to reflect, to wonder, to anticipate. That anticipation builds emotional investment, not because of what is given, but because of how it is experienced. Then there's restraint, the quiet discipline of not revealing everything at once, not expressing every thought the moment it appears. In a world that encourages constant openness, this can feel counterintuitive. But psychologically, it creates value. When access to someone feels gradual, the mind assigns more importance to each layer that's revealed. It feels earned. And that sense of progression, of discovering someone over time, creates a tension that keeps attraction alive. It turns interaction into exploration. When you step back, a pattern becomes clear. Attraction isn't driven by effort alone. It's shaped by awareness. By understanding how presence, timing, and subtle emotional cues influence perception. It's not about becoming someone else. It's about becoming more intentional in how you show up. Because in the end, what people are drawn to isn't just what they see in you, it's what they feel within themselves when they're with you. And that feeling is what they remember. Most men believe attraction is something they have to generate in real time, through words, humor, or confidence. But if you pay attention to how people actually connect, you'll notice something deeper. The strongest attraction isn't created in the moment. It's built in the space someone carries with them after you're gone. It's not just about how she feels with you, it's about how she keeps feeling you, even when you're not there. And that begins with something subtle but powerful: emotional steadiness. A man who is grounded within himself, who doesn't react impulsively or chase every shift in attention, creates a psychological environment that feels calm. Not boring, but stable. And that stability does something most don't expect. It allows a woman's mind to relax its guard. When there's no pressure, no urgency, no need to constantly manage the interaction, her attention shifts inward. She starts noticing how she feels instead of analyzing you. And that's where attraction quietly begins. Because when someone feels at ease, curiosity has room to grow. And curiosity is far more powerful than immediate excitement. Excitement fades quickly when it's predictable. But curiosity lingers. It keeps the mind engaged, asking questions, replaying moments, trying to understand what feels just slightly out of reach. This is why men who are internally anchored, who don't feel the need to over-explain themselves or constantly prove their value, often leave a stronger impression. There's something incomplete in the interaction, not in a negative way, but in a way that invites continuation. And the mind naturally seeks to complete what feels unfinished. But attraction deepens when curiosity meets connection. Not surface-level connection, but emotional awareness. The ability to sense what isn't being said, a small pause in her voice, a shift in her energy, a moment where she seems slightly more reserved or slightly more open. These are subtle signals, but they carry meaning. And when a man responds to them in a way that feels natural, without forcing it, it creates a sense of being understood. Not analyzed, not interrogated, but felt. And that feeling bypasses logic. It builds trust quickly because it feels rare. At the same time, attraction is often misunderstood as something immediate, something that either exists or doesn't. But for many women, it evolves. It builds through repeated emotional experiences. And one of the strongest of those experiences is ident.